Lewis Hamilton lifted, he braked, he even moved off the racing line. Yet when the two Ferraris crossed the finish line in Baku, Hamilton was still 4/10 ahead of Charles Leclerc. On paper, 8th instead of 9th changes nothing. But inside the Scuderia, it changed everything. Because Ferrari's final lap radio order wasn't about points, it was about control. Riccardo Adami's calm voice said, 1.5 seconds behind you. This is the last lap. Let him by. It sounded procedural, but the message carried political weight. Ferrari wanted Leclerc restored as their leading car. Hamilton's refusal, whether deliberate or by timing, was a silent act of defiance. And in that single frame, Ferrari's hierarchy cracked. The question now isn't who finished 8th. The question is who really leads Ferrari, the chosen son of Maranello, or the 7-time champion they cannot command. The decisive moment unfolded on lap 51 of 51. Hamilton had been released earlier to chase down the pack ahead. Norris, Tsunoda, Lawson, fresh tyres, clear instructions, one final push. But the mission had failed. With no overtakes made and no points gained, Ferrari reversed the strategy. Suddenly the order came. Restore Leclerc, put the Monegasque back ahead. Riccardo Adami's voice carried the instruction, clinical, flat. 1.5 seconds behind you. This is the last lap. Let him by. It was framed as nothing more than a routine message, yet the timing betrayed its real meaning. This was no sporting swap designed to maximise Ferrari's points. The outcome had already been settled. Instead, this was politics disguised as strategy. Hamilton's response was visible, not verbal. He lifted on the straights. He eased the throttle in the final corners. He even strayed slightly from the racing line, making space. The willingness to comply was clear, but the timing was not. When the checkered flag fell, Hamilton remained 0.4 of a second ahead of Leclerc. The stopwatch left no doubt. Hamilton finished 8th in 1 hour, 37 minutes, 26.492 seconds. Leclerc, behind him, crossed at 1 hour, 37 minutes, 26.896. Two Ferraris, separated by less than half a second. The order had been given. The attempt to comply had been made, yet the optics told a different story. The 7-time champion remained in front. And here's where the championship mathematics enter. On paper, those 2 points for 8th instead of 1 point for 9th did nothing for Ferrari's season. With Mercedes on 290, Ferrari on 286, and Red Bull lurking at 272, a single point does not shift the constructors' balance. But optics do. Team orders are meant to project authority. Instead, Ferrari projected fragility. Because Hamilton's 0.4 gap didn't just measure finishing position, it measured something else entirely. The distance between Ferrari's hierarchy on paper and Hamilton's reality on track. The real question is, why insist on restoring Leclerc at all, if not for control? To understand why that last lap swap mattered, you have to rewind just 20 minutes earlier. Hamilton, armed with fresher tyres, had been closing on Leclerc with ruthless precision. The delta shrank corner by corner. By lap 41, the Ferrari pit wall made the obvious call, let Hamilton through. Leclerc complied without hesitation, easing off the throttle, sliding to the left, and giving his new teammate the clear road ahead. That was a moment of harmony, a decision that made sense. Hamilton was faster, his tyres carried more grip, and Ferrari needed to see if the 7-time champion could rescue more points from a fading race. Leclerc obeyed, and in doing so, accepted the strategic logic. He did what every driver in his position would be expected to do. But the reverse? That's where everything fractures. Because by the final lap, there was no sporting logic left. Hamilton's chase had failed. The pack was gone. The attack had collapsed. 8th instead of 9th carried no material benefit for Ferrari. Yet still, the order came. Restore Leclerc, reinstate the chosen one. And here's where optics overwhelmed strategy. In the space of 10 laps, Ferrari demonstrated two very different versions of its hierarchy. First, Leclerc moved aside without question. That framed him as obedient, a driver who would yield when the team demanded. Then, Hamilton was asked to do the same. But the context had changed. This was no longer strategy, it was symbolism. The message was clear. When logic fails, hierarchy steps in. When results are gone, appearances take over. Ferrari wasn't chasing points anymore, it was chasing control. And control, in Maranello, has always been a currency more valuable than mathematics. But this is where the risk lies. Because while Leclerc's compliance went unnoticed, Hamilton's partial refusal became unforgettable. Fans freeze-framed the finish. Analysts dissected the gap. 0.4 of a second turned into evidence that Ferrari's authority is no longer absolute. And the bigger problem is this. Once a team order is exposed as hollow, it becomes harder to enforce the next time. So why did Ferrari gamble on hierarchy, knowing Hamilton might not play along? Every order in Formula One has two lives. The first is the instruction itself, the raw words carried across the airwaves. The second is the voice that delivers it. In Ferrari's case, that voice is Riccardo Adami, calm, clipped, unmistakably neutral. But neutrality can be a mask, and in Baku that mask slipped. Adami has history. He was the engineer in Vettel's final years at Ferrari, caught between a four-time champion demanding clarity and a team hierarchy desperate to maintain control. His hesitations, his half-answers, became symbolic of Ferrari's indecision. Box Sebastian, stay out, push, hold position. Words that often contradicted themselves, revealing the politics behind the pit wall. Now, with Hamilton, the stakes are magnified. This is not a fading champion trying to protect pride. This is a seven-time world champion, still ferociously sharp, who knows the weight of every syllable spoken over the radio. When Adami said, 1.5 seconds behind you, this is the last lap. Let him by. Hamilton didn't just hear strategy, he heard hierarchy. And that's the subtle danger Ferrari faces. Because an engineer's role is supposed to be functional. Tyre management, fuel targets, brake balance. But in moments like this, Adami becomes something else. A messenger for the team's political line. Every driver knows when an order is given for performance and when it's given for optics. Hamilton's late lift and imperfect compliance made it clear. He understood the difference. For Hamilton, this isn't just about lap times, it's about trust. Can he trust that his race engineer speaks only for performance? Or must he now interpret every message as coded politics? That uncertainty corrodes the bond between driver and team. And Ferrari's bigger problem is this. Once an engineer is seen as a political mouthpiece, their authority in the cockpit diminishes. Orders carry less weight. Compliance becomes negotiable. The final lap radio in Baku wasn't just Adami telling Hamilton to move aside. It was Ferrari showing its hand, and Hamilton showing that he can read the cards. So the question lingers. If Hamilton won't bend to Adami's voice, who exactly inside Ferrari believes they can bend him at all? Formula One is a sport of milliseconds, but it is also a sport of images. What the television cameras show, and what millions of fans freeze frame afterwards, often shapes the narrative more than the raw data. And in Baku, the image of two Ferraris crossing the line told a story the pit wall did not want broadcast. Hamilton was visibly offline in the final meters. His throttle trace showed a lift. His braking point came earlier than usual. He did everything short of pulling over entirely. Yet, when the checkered flag fell, the timing screen showed car 44 ahead of car 16, 0.4 of a second. A fraction, but a fraction that became evidence. In pure sporting terms, that 0.404 second margin meant 2 points instead of 1. Nothing that would swing the constructors' battle, where Mercedes sat on 290, Ferrari 286, and Red Bull close behind at 272. But in political terms, it meant everything. Because a team order is not judged on points alone, it is judged on authority. Team orders are supposed to be absolute. When the pit wall speaks, the driver obeys. Barrichello moved aside in Austria 2002. Massa did the same for Alonso in Germany 2010. The optics are harsh, but the authority is clear. In Baku, Ferrari tried the same play, but the execution faltered. The broadcast cut away quickly, dismissing it as the tail end of a midfield fight. But fans online didn't miss it. Slow motion replays spread. The freeze frame of Hamilton, fractionally ahead, became symbolic of resistance. And in Formula One, symbols matter. Because if a team cannot enforce its will in front of the cameras, how can it enforce it behind closed doors? Ferrari may argue that Hamilton complied too late, that the order was misunderstood, that the finish was immaterial, but the picture remains. One Ferrari ahead of the other, not the one the team wanted. And so, the optics of Baku project not unity, but weakness. A team unable to impose its chosen hierarchy. The next question is inevitable. What does this mean inside the garage, where unity is already fragile, and egos are always one radio call from rupture? Inside the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere after Baku was anything but routine. For the outside world, it was 8th and 9th place, a forgettable result buried deep in the midfield. But for those wearing red, it was a psychological earthquake. Because when two drivers respond to the same type of order in opposite ways, the comparison becomes impossible to ignore. Charles Leclerc obeyed without question. Earlier in the race, when Hamilton closed on him with fresher tyres, he yielded instantly. It was painful pride swallowed in real time, but it was also logic. Hamilton was faster. Ferrari needed him ahead. Leclerc moved aside and the message was simple. I will comply for the good of the team. Hamilton, by contrast, executed the reverse with hesitation. He lifted, yes. He moved offline, yes. But he crossed the line ahead anyway. No words spoken, no rebellion shouted into the radio. Just an act of timing that carried its own meaning. The psychological effect is subtle but devastating. One driver accepts his place in the hierarchy. The other challenges it in silence. Leclerc's compliance paints him as dutiful, but also secondary. Hamilton's resistance paints him as uncontrollable, but also as the stronger presence. In the politics of the garage, perception is power. This is where the real battle begins. Because Ferrari does not just manage machinery, it manages egos. And the contrast between Hamilton's subtle defiance and Leclerc's quiet obedience is already shaping narratives. Who looks like the leader? Who looks like the follower? Who can the team trust to enforce its will? For Hamilton, the message is clear. He is not at Ferrari to play supporting act. For Leclerc, the risk is equally clear. His position as Maranello's chosen son looks vulnerable when a 7-time champion refuses to bow. And when a team's hierarchy fractures at the psychological level, no strategy can hold it together for long. So the tension builds toward the inevitable next chapter. How does this clash affect Ferrari's broader championship campaign, where constructors' points and political control are colliding every single weekend? Step back from the drama of 8th versus 9th, and the numbers reveal why Ferrari's internal fractures matter more than they seem. In Baku, the difference was 1 point. On the standings sheet, that single digit looks irrelevant. But in the constructors' battle, the margins are razor thin. Mercedes sit on 290, Ferrari on 286, Red Bull on 272. A 4-point spread separates second from fourth. Every point counts, not just for the standings, but for the financial windfall and technical resources that follow. Now imagine the optics. Mercedes, united behind Russell's consistency, are punching above their weight. McLaren, dominant with Piastri, are stretching their lead to 623 points with 12 wins and 27 podiums. Ferrari, they are losing points not because of pace, but because of politics. When a team order produces confusion instead of clarity, the damage multiplies. History offers cruel reminders. Think back to Austria, 2002, when Barrichello slowed meters from the line to hand victory to Schumacher. Ferrari won the race, but lost face with the world. Or to Hockenheim, 2010, when Massa was told, Fernando is faster than you. Alonso crossed first, but the scandal overshadowed the result. In both cases, the team's authority remained intact, but its reputation suffered. Baku is different, because this time the order didn't even succeed. The optics showed Ferrari issuing a command and a 7-time champion crossing the line in front regardless. That is authority, not just questioned, but visibly undermined. And here's where the championship compass points to trouble. Ferrari are locked in a 3-way fight for second. Every lost point hands momentum to Mercedes or Red Bull. But worse, every display of internal weakness sends a signal to rivals. If Hamilton and Leclerc are pulling in opposite directions, Ferrari will waste energy fighting itself instead of fighting the competition. Which leads to the next fracture, the decision Ferrari must make. Do they double down on hierarchy and risk alienating Hamilton? Or do they empower him and risk diminishing Leclerc's status? Because, make no mistake, the constructors' fight is about points, but the battle inside Ferrari is about survival. Ferrari now stands at a fork in the road, and neither path is smooth. The first option is control. Reinforce hierarchy. Make it clear that Charles Leclerc remains the team's figurehead, the driver around whom Ferrari's identity is built. That means doubling down on team orders, ensuring that Hamilton knows when the call comes. Compliance is not optional. On paper, it secures stability. In reality, it risks mutiny. Because Hamilton did not leave Mercedes after 17 years to play second fiddle. He joined Ferrari to lead, to prove his legacy extends beyond Brackley. Force him into obedience, and the seven-time champion may not just resist, he may disengage entirely. The second option is empowerment. Give Hamilton freedom. Acknowledge his authority, even if it shifts the internal balance away from Leclerc. Let him shape strategy. Let him take control of the fight on track. This path maximizes Hamilton's potential, but it undermines Leclerc's status. For a driver groomed as Ferrari's chosen son, the optics of being demoted would cut deep. It risks fracturing his trust, perhaps even his future loyalty to Maranello. Both options carry consequences beyond the drivers themselves. Ferrari's staff, from mechanics to strategists, watch these dynamics closely. A split garage is poison. Once factions emerge, Hamilton loyalists on one side, Leclerc loyalists on the other, the team wastes energy on politics rather than performance. And history is merciless to teams that divide. McLaren in 2007 collapsed under the weight of Hamilton versus Alonso. Red Bull in 2018 cracked when Ricciardo refused to play Verstappen's supporting act. Ferrari's danger is clear. Mishandle this balance, and the Scuderia's 2025 season could unravel before Monza. The constructors' fight would be lost, not on track, but in the garage. The silent defiance in Baku was not just a missed team order. It was the opening shot of a potential civil war. And civil wars don't end with one side winning. They end with both sides bleeding. So Ferrari faces the brutal question, do they risk losing Hamilton's trust by protecting Leclerc, or risk losing Leclerc's faith by empowering Hamilton? The final lap in Baku looked like nothing more than a midfield scrap. Two Ferraris, 8th and 9th, buried in the timing sheets. But the freeze frame told a story the numbers could not hide. A team order was issued, a seven-time champion lifted. And yet, when the checkered flag fell, Hamilton remained 4/10ths ahead. That single image exposed Ferrari's deepest fault line, the illusion of control. Because in Formula One, team orders are not just about position, they're about power. Leclerc's compliance earlier in the race painted him as dutiful, but subordinate. Hamilton's refusal, deliberate or not, painted him as untouchable, a driver unwilling to bend, even when the stakes were purely symbolic. For Ferrari, that contrast is poison. It erodes hierarchy, it corrodes trust, and it broadcasts fragility at a time when their rivals smell blood. The implications stretch far beyond Baku. Ferrari trail Mercedes by just 4 points in the constructors' standings, with Red Bull lurking 14 points behind. Every decision, every act of unity or disunity will shape that fight. And inside Maranello, the choice is brutal. Enforce hierarchy and risk losing Hamilton, or empower Hamilton and risk diminishing Leclerc. Either path could split the garage, and history shows divided teams do not win championships. So here's the question. Should Ferrari insist on control, even at the cost of alienating their most decorated driver? Or should they accept that Hamilton has come not to follow but to lead, even if it rewrites Leclerc's role inside the team? Brilliant adaptation or dangerous gamble? That is the dilemma Ferrari cannot escape.